Ready? You have the cameras rolling?
Welcome to Outspoken.
This better be good.
A show about
floods, mutant, plagues, man-eating plants.
Actually, it's about thought-provoking, compelling conversations with people who have something important to say, a good story to tell, or knowledge we can learn from.
Oh, good for you.
And now,
Hold on to your butts.
here's Scott and Curtis.
Hello and welcome to the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. I'm Scott, and of course with us today, as always, is Curtis. Hey, Curtis.
Hey, Scott. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. So before we get started, I just want to know, have you been following the saga at Twitter?
Oh, yes. It's my guilty pleasure now that the Amber Heard trial is over.
So, I was reading some stats that have come out the last couple of days, and it sounds like Elon, he just reported he's added 1.6 million users in the past week. And if you look at his daily average
Colossal failure.
Yeah, exactly. And then you look at his graph of average daily users, and it's like a 45-degree angle. I mean, it's, went down, and then all of a sudden it's kind of, now it's going on a huge track. And I just think it's wild that that's happening in the face of 4,800 employee layoffs and people that have quit. And then, of course, what everybody else does, they do the subcontractors, they let them go, and that's another 4,400. And I think he made the off-the-cuff remark that for every one coder, there were 10 managers, something crazy like that, or 10 executives and managers, and just how, by the way, they're hiring again. They're hiring sales, they're hiring engineering, which is just crazy. And for me, what we're seeing is courtside tickets to the complete remaking of a company, and something we usually don't see. And I just think it's crazy.
There's a great article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm trying to remember the author's name. Apologies to him. It's a fantastic article. We'll try to link in the show notes, but it referred to this as the destruction of the jobs program for surplus elites.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's obvious, is that pivot from publisher and very activist style to the true platform that people talk about, and a much more evenly weighting of what they allow across the political spectrums, less focused on that, more focused on just the real dangerous stuff on the two ends. And then how cool it is, or not cool, but how interesting it is to see that effect on the other tech companies, and how they're now rushing from where they were, the whole free money world, bring a lot of people on, to all of a sudden much more lean companies, or lean operating style, and focused on net income, a lot like when we talked to the CEO of Combinize over the past, I think 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, when we talked to Dimitar, and also to the ex-CEO of Bloomfire, Mark,
Yep.
We talked about a little bit about this, about the, with the Fed rate going up, the era of free money is coming to an end. As an investor, your risk-adjusted return now has to go from something like 3%. You're just searching for something greater than a 0% return, to now you're looking for a 12, 15% risk-adjusted return. And if you're not the kind of company that can deliver that over the 18 months, you're not getting any money. And if you're a company that's been funded, and you're looking for Series B funding or greater, your stock options just became worthless, because your valuation is about to get, halved or quartered.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, it's going to be some wailing and gnashing of teeth. I just did a training for a Fortune 500 financial firm out in North Carolina, and opened the session with roomful developers talking about the operating model that we needed to install there. And one of the first slides I showed was a bunch of numbers, and 6,700, 11,000, 2,400, 3,300. Who can tell me what these numbers are? Silence. And one guy in the back went, "Are those layoffs?" Bingo. So, do I have your attention? Right. So 120,000 layoffs this year alone. We're not even done with the year, right? This year alone, 120,000 layoffs in tech companies and startups. and more coming, right? And we always talk, Scott, about how one of the most lacking resources in corporate America is leadership courage.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as Elon stepped in and took the first whack, you saw in quick succession Amazon, Facebook, Google's now announced 10,000 person layoff plus a hiring freeze.
Cisco, Netflix, freeze. You could go down the who's who.
Yeah, it's just bam, 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 right? So I think there's going to be a lot of fast followers, and I think a lot of people who went $200,000 in debt to earn a degree in basket weaving are, who were previously employed in places like that in these sort of, ephemeral job categories are going to find themselves looking for a chair pretty soon. So if you're not, if you're not in a position to be able to quantify your value, you should learn that very quickly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that upbeat note, I am very, very pleased to introduce to the world a good friend of mine. We spent many years in the trenches together and raised families together. And despite being separated by now some 1,500 miles, he and I have remained close. And I'm always very proud of his accomplishments and always extremely proud to call him a good friend. And that is Dr. Kai Dupe. Kai, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be with you.
So by way of introduction, Kai is a technical trainer at Microsoft and also the founder and managing partner at Alhaven Group. And Alhaven Group, I should mention, is primarily a DEI diversity consultancy.
That is correct.
I think you also do some leadership training and coaching, yes?
Yes, sir.
All right. The rather mundane title, technical trainer, does not do justice to Kai's resume. He spent 30 years in the trenches coding and has done so at a number of prestigious companies and, all sorts of domains, all sorts of industries. Having worked closely with him in those trenches, I can tell you he's one of the best I've ever worked with, both in terms of his technical ability, but also in terms of his ability just to relate to other people who are non-technical and be able to break down the break down the requirements into plain language to communicate with his colleagues. Kai has always been well loved on the floor. And I think another aspect of Kai's talents is his ability to communicate his knowledge at the podium. He's a fantastic trainer. I've seen him speak a number of times. And that's why he was sought after. Kai is probably too modest to mention that he also worked at Amazon for a while, leading training there across the world in many of the AWS services, and then took his talents to Microsoft across the street there in Seattle, and did the same thing with the Azure cloud and now many other technologies as well. So if you sign up for Microsoft technical training, you're liable to see this man's face in your classroom or on your Zoom call, and you'll be the better for it. So Kai, again, we appreciate you being here.
Man, you make it sound like I'm somebody. I appreciate that.
Kathy, your wife, is probably going to tell me, just, make sure his head can still fit through the door.
That's enough. I appreciate that, Curtis, for sure, man. That's a very kind introduction. Definitely try to get some things right. Some things didn't go as well as I would like for them to have gone, but overall, pretty happy with the results, as I know you are as well.
Kai, we shared this background at a quasi-governmental firm we worked at some time ago, and during that time, got to know a little bit about your background, and it's really a compelling story. You and I are both speakers, both trainers. And we really enjoy the art of storytelling and incorporating that into our training. And I've just always found your personal story to be really compelling. And one of your missions has been to really help kids who grew up like yourself to find opportunity in the technical field. And I'm wondering if you just share a little bit of that backstory with folks.
Sure. It's funny you mentioned that because I just started maybe a month ago. I'm doing some volunteer work. And so I'm teaching introduction to computer science using Python at a high school to ninth graders in Columbus, Mississippi.
Mm.
And you talk about a group of folks who, you know, outside of my doing this, they don't have this opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would say that's kind of where my story started, right? Not having opportunity. Growing up San Antonio, Texas, never really seeing any role models, particularly any role models who did what I would consider at this point white collar work or professional work. All I saw was laborers, um, single family home. My mother worked as a cook, um, only one bringing in income, 6 children. Um, and so my entire upbringing was dedicated and focused on how can I get myself out of this situation?
Were you the oldest of six?
No, I'm second to the baby.
Second to baby. Okay. Okay.
And, you know, just trying to find my way, right? In the midst of a lot of, for the most part, a lot of discouragement, being told what you can't do. Um, Opportunities aren't there for African Americans, not seeing anyone, as I said, not seeing anyone doing anything outside of my sister, who was the one that introduced me to the whole concept of college, right?
Mm.
My idea was I hated school. Let me get out of this school situation as soon as I possibly can. And I can remember I had been a good student in elementary school. I had been a good student. Well, I was a good student in elementary school. Junior high school, I fell off a little bit because I discovered girls.
Mm.
And at that point, I didn't care anything about school. And I took that same philosophy into high school where I was making C's and C minuses. And I took a PSAT, which my daughter just took not too long ago. And I did okay on the PSAT, right? And so a counselor. So in my story, there's been a lot of, you can't do this, you don't see this, poverty, drugs, criminality, all this type of stuff. But there were a couple people in there that steered me into the right direction. And it's really how I got to where I am now.
And can I just pause there, Kai? I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing, but you, when you say poverty, drugs, crime, I mean, some of that hit very, very close to home, did not?
Oh, absolutely. Let's see. Let's see. So I never, well, I'm gonna say I never did drugs, but I was definitely introduced to drugs. And I had brothers, older brothers, who how shall we say, they were in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so that served as a very strong uh, deterrent for me. I watched my brothers go to jail. I have my older brother who's since passed on. He was incarcerated multiple times, away from us a lot. I remember visiting him in jail cells. Uh, my second oldest brother ended up getting in trouble because he followed behind my oldest brother. He had to flee the city, move away. And so I saw all of this, right? I can remember going out to we had a house in San Antonio, and in the back of our house, we had another house, like a mini house. It had everything except plumbing, but it had electricity. And so my middle
California,
brother,
they call them ADUs now, just so you know. That's the thing.
It was like a storage shed, but my sister one time she renovated it and she gave it power and everything, so you could live out there. And my second oldest brother, he lived out there for a while, and he was doing illegal activity out there. I didn't know that, so I would go out there and I would go out there to listen to music and steal his change and stuff like that, take his clothes and wear them to school. And one time I opened up an ice chest and it was just full of stuff that I had no business seeing. So that was a strong deterrent. And then I saw their lifestyles, right? Although I did see a lot of glitz and glamour, I also saw the downside of it. My mother, I saw her working until she couldn't stand anymore, right? In terms of her exhaustion. And so I said to myself, I've got to do something different than this, but I don't know what that is. And as I was saying, I took that PSAT in the midst of all of this, right? And a counselor saw the score and she sends for me, right? I go to her office. She goes, "Yeah, can I talk to you for a second?" I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "You did pretty good on the PSAT." And I said, "Okay, thank you." And I was ready to leave. And she's like, "Why are you doing so poorly with your grades?" They were, like I said, they were C minus, barely, average. And I said, what do you mean? I don't know what you mean. She said, well, you did good on this test. And over here, you're doing C's. I said, well, the test is a one-time thing. Right? It's not an average of grades. It's not turning in homework. It's not any of that. You just show up and write down the answers. But the C's are because I'm not trying to go to class every day. I'm not trying to read all the books. I'm not trying to do all the studying.
Yeah.
She goes, I never forget her. I'm writing about her in my forthcoming book. She goes, oh, okay. So let me ask you this. What kind of life you plan on having when you graduate from high school? I said, the bomb life. Porsche, women, travel the world. I got it all laid out. Yeah. You're probably gonna need to go to college for that. And I swear, when she said that, in my mind, I was in the 10th grade. I was like, when I graduated high school, I was done with college, with school.
Mm-hmm.
She goes, no, you need to go to college. And then you need to get a professional job, and then maybe you can live that life. And that was like she slapped me in the face. If you look at my high school transcript, that's the moment that it switched.
Yeah.
Even though I messed around the first 2 years, I still ended up graduating top 20 in my class after making C's for two years straight. And I really just put the effort in and the time in, took all the honors classes, all that kind of stuff. And then I made the same mistake in college. I graduated high school, got scholarships, went to college, did the same thing. I'm gonna get my degree. Who cares about the grades? Foiled again. I was about to graduate, and they were doing all the recruiting. I remember Exxon came to campus, and they had a sign. Exxon's coming to campus. If you want to get a job at Exxon, go interview. And I ran over there and they had on the sign, it said, must have a 3.5 GPA. What?
You mean to tell me?
So that's a little bit about my story. And a friend of mine, he wrote a book a couple of years ago chronicling some of our experiences coming up. And he laid out how the 20 males in my neighborhood, how they've all fallen prey to, drugs, imprisonment, death, and other things. And he and I are the only two who went to college, and both of us ended up getting doctorates. But we were also the two that hung out the most. And just wasn't a lot of positive. My sister, she's another person, as I said, there were a couple people. She went to the military, and when she came out of the military, she used her GI Bill to get a degree. And she got a degree in social work, and I saw her lifestyle change. She went and bought the house that she wanted. She bought a car every time she wanted a new car. We'd be over her house, and a Pizza Hut commercial would come on. She'd be like, y'all want pizza? We're like, yeah. And that was unheard of in my house,
Yeah.
And I just saw her live a different lifestyle. So her coupled with my high school counselor, who I heard she passed not so long ago. She changed my life because I was going to be doing the same things the rest of those folks are going to be doing. And one of my good friends, I think you met him. I remember when I graduated high school, and when I was in high school, it would be like dances and parties and football games. And they would say, you never go to none of this stuff. I said, I go, but I go after I finish my work. So that when I get to class tomorrow for the test, and y'all are up there scratching your head, I'm humming through that test, right? And I didn't party as much as y'all did, but I partied enough. And I remember graduating high school, and they had a thing where they would announce your name, and they would name your accolades, right? National Honor Society. Kai has scholarships from these universities. And my friends didn't have any. And they were like, why is he getting the pause on stage while you read these scholarships? I'm like, that's because I was studying when y'all were partying. That's what I was doing, right? And that was really the beginning of turning everything around for me.
That's really compelling. Why do you think it is that you and your other friend, is that Mateen?
Yeah.
Why do you think it is that you and Mateen didn't fall prey to those? Because you mentioned you saw the things that were going on with your brothers and with other folks in the neighborhood as a warning sign, a path that you didn't want to go down, versus following that life and just say, well, they did it wrong. They weren't smart enough to not get caught.
I can only surmise, man. We talk about this all the time. We talk about making choices. But I can tell you there were times when I regretted my choices. They looked like a good choice, right? I was just telling Kathy this the other day. I remember I went to a school in San Antonio, so I went to school locally. First, I went to Texas. First, I was planning to go to UT Austin. I had a scholarship to UT Austin. And then and I was going to major in engineering. And then at the end, the 11th hour, Texas A&M offered me a scholarship. And I didn't know anything about college. So the money that Texas A&M offered me was like $8 more or something. It was something trivial. But I thought, it's more. That tells you what you were dealing with, right?
Yeah.
So I went to Texas A&M. It was too big. It was huge. I didn't function well. And I remember I was in class one day in a civil engineering course, and the professor said, it was like week 3. He came in there and said, if you're not waking up in the morning, just loving to come to this class, and you're just excited about this, you're probably in the wrong place. And I was like, oh, I had like a T-square. I was like, I packed all that stuff up and left.
Was that for your master's or for your bachelor's?
Yeah, I ended up going to Trinity in San Antonio.
Okay.
And they just happened to, they didn't have an engineering program. Yeah, that's where I got the bachelor's. It just so happens because they didn't have engineering, I majored in computer science. And that's how that occurred. But I remember when I was going to school, I was still living in my mom's house. I had to catch the bus. It was clear across town. And I was talking about questioning my choices. I can remember being at a bus stop with a backpack and an umbrella looking like a chump, right? And it's raining. And my friends who had graduated and got jobs, wherever, the hospital, the army base, they were pulling up to the light in these nice cars with the radio jamming, with the women in the car. And I was standing like a chump with an umbrella. I'm like, this don't seem right. I'm trying to do the right thing, but I don't have no women. I ain't driving no car. But I think to answer your question, I think a couple things happened. I don't know this for sure, but my friend and he tells me this, he says that because he hung out with me and I was so focused on studying, he knew that he couldn't keep hanging out with me if he didn't study. And I think what saved us from a lot of the other things that my friends fell prey to was we had somewhat of a vision for our future. My friend and I both had an idea about what we want to do in the future. And so we saw these other things as detriments, right? I can remember even after high school and going to a party and being at a party with a friend of mine who had moved away and he was just home visiting and moved to DC. And we walk into this party and my friend goes to the restroom and he comes out and says, oh man, you got to go check out the restroom. So I go in the restroom, it's drugs everywhere, right? And my friend decided to partake, which shocked me. Not Mateen, but the one that had moved away. I said, man, you gonna do this stuff? And he was like, yeah. And we left. Me and Mateen left. We're like, nah, this is not our scene, right? And so that would happen all the time, as my other friends or neighborhood buddies that I grew up with would decide to dabble in criminal activity. And I got caught with my share of criminal activity, but fighting, getting in trouble at school, whatever it was, I saw that as the detraction or distraction from what I had my mind on, which was what my counselor had told me and what I saw of my sister, right? I did not want to remain in poverty. I did not want to remain in that neighborhood. And at that time, the only thing I saw as a way out of that I could do, I wasn't a tremendous athlete. I couldn't sing. I didn't have a rock band, was study. And I was just telling my kids this other day, I said, a lot of things changed for me when I realized when I got to Texas A&M, they handed me a check for grades, right? It was thousands of dollars. There was a scholarship, right? And I looked at that. I didn't do anything to get it, but make these grades. As long as I made these grades, they're going to keep giving me these checks, right? And that ended up being the story of my life, right? Because I keep learning this technology, which in my mind is the same as making these grades, and the checks keep coming.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. And just to flesh out that backstory and wrap it up, you after your bachelor's at Trinity, which is a prestigious private school in San Antonio, you then went for your master's at A&M, correct?
At A&M, yeah. I only went for the master's because I had been in tech at that time. That was 2005. So I've been in tech. I've been in a long time, and I was reconsidering if I wanted to continue as a developer. And I was working in California somewhere, and we had just gotten laid off. Speaking of layoffs, we just gotten laid off. And I said, I have to find another job. And I applied for 3 jobs. I applied for another job as a developer, and it was a consulting contract job. I applied for a job in the Caribbean, and I applied, and I saw this ad for a trade school, like an ITT Tech, something like that in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And I said, oh, I'll go to their open house and I'll go and see what would it take for me to flip into this role, right? I can use my technical abilities. I like to teach. I've always taught, I even tutored elementary kids when I was in high school. I've always taught. And when I went over there to interview, they said, well, what are you doing now? I said, I have a full-time job as a developer. You hired. I said, I didn't come over here to get a job. I just wanted to see what I needed to put on my resume. I ended up getting all 3 of those jobs. And that was the beginning of me deciding to look into teaching, right? And so I taught at this ITT Tech school, and I loved it. And that was the beginning of me deciding to move those skills. And then I got the job offer to go to the Caribbean. I went to the Caribbean for 3 years. And when I came back, I was all set on teaching. And that's where you got to get a master's degree. If you want to teach in college, you got to get a PhD. And so that's how that happened. I ended up getting a PhD from Pepperdine.
Yeah.
Or EDD, really.
You're still going to school, and we were working together at the company that shall not be named, right?
Yeah, man. And that's also interesting because in that role, I had decided, okay, I'm going to finish this PhD. I'm not going to code anymore. That's why I took that job, because it was a job that wasn't challenging for me. I didn't have to learn anything new. I could just sit on my skills that I already had. And then I ended up working there like 5 years, didn't get the doctorate.
Yeah.
Then I was trying to go back into the workplace, and as anybody in tech can attest, that's not easy.
Yeah.
And I had not been in tech. The tech that we were using at that particular place was kind of outdated, right?
Yeah.
Not outdated, but it wasn't a prominent programming language.
Yeah, it had its day, and it was kind of being.
It was kind of being, even though I ended up using it again in 2017. That's another story.
Yeah.
But and so I didn't get the degree right away. I ended up going back and getting it, but it made it hard to break back into tech, but I was able to do it.
What I think is great about your story, Kai, is it shows the power of just one or two really encouraging voices. What power that can have over a young person. And Scott, I know you're mentoring a young man even now, and in addition to your son, right? You're also volunteering your time with a young man, kind of in the same capacity.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so important. I think there's a whole separate discussion about the state of young men in America in general today, but I think it's it's really
what I would say about that is, when you're young, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter race, no matter situation, it's so much that you don't know. You just don't know. I say this to my son all the time, because he's 15. He thinks he knows everything. I'm like, you're literally walking around the house with a legend. You have me at your disposal. and you won't ask me any questions, right?
Kai,
I grew up fatherless.
Kai, it is pretty amazing.
My brothers, and they were up to no good. The best thing they did for me was to say, you don't do this. We're doing this, but we see that you're studying, you're going to go to school, you stick with that. We'll handle this street thing kind of thing. But the main thing that I would say, to your point, Curtis, and it was powerful, because the people who gave me the advice could see that I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would he score well on the SAT, but he's over here playing around with his grades? Obviously, he doesn't know something. And I responded to it, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I try to do as much mentoring as I can, because I know that could be the case. When I went into this Teal's classroom the first time, they were not listening to me at all. I mean, when I came on the call and I'm starting to talk about Python and stuff, I could see disinterest. So I said, oh, let's talk about money. Because I can talk about, not that I'm rich, but I'm nowhere near in poverty.
Right.
And my experiences, which I've traveled the world, I've lived in multiple places, including the Caribbean, all because of that one skill that I garnered way, way long time ago. I've been riding that programming skill since 1987.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to tell people it's the core of tech, right? I can do anything in tech because I know how to program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Scott, you were going to make a point?
Yeah, I just was going to bring up, it's amazing though that as a 10th grader that you listened. That you actually listened. I mean, that's a pretty good trait to have it as a 10th grader, because not many 10th graders listen.
Yeah, my son.
How well did you listen, Scott?
I wouldn't have.
I think it has something to do with who it came from. Yeah. Right? Like my son is he loves volleyball. I can tell him 10 times what I think about something. He pays no attention. Volleyball coach tells him. He comes home and tells me like it's news. I'm like,
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard about that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh man, that's hilarious. All right. Well, listen, that's a great setup. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the current tech landscape with our guest, Dr. Kai Dupe.
Are you tired of working outside in the heat? Do you hate your boss? Do you want to get paid to sit on your ass and talk for a living? Well, if you answered yes to the last question, then voiceover might be for you. But if you think it's as easy as buying a microphone, hooking it up to your computer, and all of a sudden you're gonna get paid, think again. It's just like your mom told you. You gotta go to school.
You gotta go to school.
And you need to talk to actor, voice actor, director, and producer Jonathan McFadden of Prodigy Talent Training.
I'm Jonathan McFadden.
Jonathan works in the business, so he knows the ins and outs, and he can help you excel in the field you want to. Audiobooks, animation, video games, radio ads, and of course, voiceover. But you can't wait around because classes fill up fast. So get over to calendly.com/prodigytt. Yeah, that's a weird word. Here, I'll spell it. calendly.com/prodigytt. Click New Student Interview and pick a time that works for you. So listen to your mom and go to Prodigy Talent Training.
You gotta go to school.
And we're back on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis, and our guest today, Dr. Kai Dupe, former colleague, good friend. Kai and I spent some time in the trenches together, and he's since moved on to much greener pastures, first with Amazon and now with Microsoft, teaching the world about the joys of cloud computing. So Kai, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about what's going on in the tech world right now. As we speak, the week of November 26th, the business press and the tech press is abuzz with news of layoffs and tech apocalypse. I should coin that, by the way, right? That's trademark tech.
Yeah, you published it first. It's right here.
We've seen a bunch of layoffs. We've seen a bunch of rude awakenings, not just at Twitter, but also Facebook or Meta, Alphabet / Google, and many other companies following suit. The one or two big companies that I haven't heard of and haven't heard announced layoffs are Apple and Microsoft. So what's your assessment of those companies? Are you expecting to see something similar happen there? And if not, why not?
I wouldn't say expecting. I wouldn't be surprised if we did. Usually when a note comes out or you start seeing what you're seeing in the press, and they may interview somebody from Microsoft or Amazon or some tech company, and they say, we don't foresee any layoffs, pretty much going to be laid off. Right? It's like an NBA coach. When they say, we have no plans of firing a coach for the foreseeable future, and literally the next day you probably do, right? But I've been around a long time, so I know that there's ebbs and flows to this, and I don't really worry about it too much. It goes back to something that I tell young people when I mentor them, and something that it's one of the reasons why I never went into management. I tell them, you're always working to stay ready. You're always adding to your skill set. You're always working to stay relevant, and you want to have more than one skill, right? So if push come to shove, and push has come and shoved me many times, right? me and Push on a first name basis. I flip, I can pivot.
Yeah.
Right. So I know that as a trainer, I'm more of a cost than I am bringing in revenue. And I've been laid off as a trainer before, but I can fall back on coding. Right. And I've done that. When I was in Houston in 2015, I was working as a trainer for a smaller company, a startup, smaller outfit. And I was a global trainer. So I was always somewhere around the world, India, Paris, Jakarta, somewhere. And the first year I was on that job, it dried up, the training. Mm-hmm. And people started coming to my desk. What you working on? I'm like, I'm working on the next training. Do you have one lined up? No, we don't. Okay. A couple weeks later, what you working on? Right. Because the first year they had a need for me. And then the second year they didn't. And then it became, well, what else can you do? What else? I heard you used to be a programmer. Right. Can you help us fix some bugs? And I said, I could, but my training fee versus my programming fee, that's two different fees.
Yeah.
So they didn't like that. Anyway, I did write some code for them, and then I ended up getting laid off of that company for the very same reason of training drying up or what have you. So I ended up going back and I got a job working in Arizona as a developer using that same programming language that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. And I spent 6 months doing that until I got my next opportunity. So this kind of thing, happens to me. It happens in cycles. We're in an economic downturn is what I'm hearing. I don't know. I can say what the experts say. And during that time frame, you're going to see some of these companies who are living, I don't want to say beyond their means, but probably doing more hiring and being more aggressive than what they probably should have right before the downturn. And now they're rebounding or recalibrating, so to speak, from that. I don't expect anything to happen in Microsoft, but it would not surprise me. And the advice that I tell people, I don't want to say fully committed because I am fully committed, but I stay, for lack of a better word, agile, right?
Yeah.
I'm ready to move. I'm ready to pivot. All of my eggs are never in one basket. Never, ever, ever. I've just been doing it for too long to not expect good times all the time. There's going to be downturns. There's going to be, and if you just happen to be in an area that they consider expendable, which we've seen with many companies over the last 5-6 years, with mobile was one of them. You and I worked on mobile together a while back. That was a big hot thing, right? And then there were places that tried mobile, didn't work out for them, and they closed the doors and laid off hundreds of people, So it just depends. But as a developer, I'll say, I really, over the course of my career, that hasn't happened to me that much. When they start trimming the fat, rarely, in my experience, have I seen them trim developers. And when they do, they trim the ones that you knew wasn't doing anything anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so if you stay on top of your game, it's not foolproof, but your chances of surviving probably a little bit better than the average person who's kind of holding on, not really putting the time in, so that they can be as valuable to the company as they possibly can. But again, you can be valuable and still get laid off. There's no question about that. Tech is, high reward, high risk, in my opinion.
Hey, Kai, I got a question for you. Since you've done cloud at Amazon and you've done cloud at Microsoft, what were the things that struck you about how they operated differently, and what really stood out as the secrets to maybe Amazon's success or Microsoft's success in cloud? I'm really curious because they're two just really well-known companies, and you've had insight to both.
Yeah, that's a broad question. When I first started, I had been like a month, and somebody said, "Which one is better?"
I have no idea.
They're definitely different in their approaches, in terms of how they built the software. But from a company standpoint, let me see, how would I characterize this? They're both seriously customer centric, which is something I think is weird that's like a relatively new thing at all companies to say, we're focused on the customer. I'm like, we used to call that requirements, right? We're going to go talk to folks and see what they want in the software.
But how does that manifest itself? I'm really curious about that, because that's a big discussion item right now. But how did that manifest itself when you say customer centric?
Oh, for example, at Microsoft, I've seen, as I've started in my role as a trainer, we're trying to come up with the best experiences for the customers to learn Azure, whether that be our curriculum, our public-facing documentation, our online learning. What they do at Microsoft, which this is a big thing that I just thought of since you asked the question. They're always gathering feedback constantly. It's a constant. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And then they respond to it. That's a huge difference. A lot of times you'll put feedback in a tool or say this should change or whatever. It never changes. But I've seen feedback from the training team as well as feedback from customers be implemented into the processing, the tooling, what have you. I don't recall doing a whole lot of that at AWS, although you would think that they do because they have these, what they call principles, leadership principles. I think it's like 14 of them or something. And one of them is be customer obsessive. So they actually have that same focus. I didn't realize that Microsoft also had that focus. But when I was at AWS, I would see that, but I didn't see it manifest itself. It wasn't as obvious to me that what customers said, in our case, the learners, I didn't see a lot of that manifest into the classroom or into our experience. Another thing that I would say is different. I felt like I was a lot more stressed out and a lot less work-life balance, a lot less focus on wellness in the workplace than what I see at Microsoft. And I think that's a big difference, a huge difference, and it makes an impact on the folks who are doing the work.
So this wraps really nicely with what you guys were talking about. Though you would go out and do, what was your stress release walk? What'd you call it?
Zen walk.
Zen walk.
Yeah, Zen walk. So which do you think is more productive? I mean, you can have a super high stress environment where someone's always on you and you're feeling that pressure. I've got to go. I can't have any downtime. And then the flip side, you have Microsoft, which you do, sounds like you have some work-life balance, some downtime. Which do you think is more productive?
I think the Microsoft way is more productive. And It's really funny, right? Because that's not the cloth that I was cut from. When I came up in IT, it was really the beginning of the PC. And it was the 87, 86. And it was the beginning of the whole microcomputer explosion that happened, right? Mm-hmm. And I was in my 20s, and that was late nights, weekends, holidays, you're always working. And then as I got older and I, started learning about the mind and neuroscience and education and how these things work, relaxation and a removal of stress, at least working on how you respond to stress, I think is way more productive. As a matter of fact, I posted an article about this on LinkedIn not too long ago. I forget who wrote the article, apologies, but it was like the pathology of productivity, right? You could be, you're pushing yourself so much to become productive that you become less productive.
Yeah, because you have
I think that Microsoft and what they're doing in that way, I think that's the way to go. And we have moments, I have times where I feel overworked. It's not perfect. And my job is very demanding because, when I was at AWS, one of the things I thought that they did right, when they teach their courses, they teach 3-day courses, which is the sweet spot, right? So when I was traveling, I'm not traveling now, I fly to a city on Monday. I would teach Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I fly out on Friday morning. When I started at Microsoft, they had classes that were longer than 5 days. So trainers were flying in on a Sunday, training on Monday through Friday, spending the weekend or going home and then coming back and doing 3 or 4 more days. Well, that's ridiculous, right? You can't do that. And I still am pushing for the 3-day, and they've been reducing, right? I still have one class that I teach that's 5 days. Excuse me. And when I say it's exhausting, I mean, I'm constantly on that microphone and I'm constantly on the screen, right? I have to be there. Now, some classes we have 2 trainers and we'll take turns and teach that way. But that's a high engagement, high energy, high stimulus role. And so when I come off the microphone on Friday, I don't look at a computer until the next Monday, right? And so this week was different. I took vacation this week, but then Monday I started a 4-day class, and then next week another 4-day class, and then next week a 5-day class. It's a constant. Whereas when I was development, I could write code for 2 hours, go take a Zen walk, come back and code for 2 more hours, and you're not having to talk, speak, engage. It's a lot more energy required to do it. But I think that Microsoft is on the right track, and I think a lot of companies are following suit. There's a lot of conversation now about wellness in the workplace because it benefits the company, right? And what's the guy's name? The CEO of he was Ryan. He was the CEO of LinkedIn. I don't think he is anymore. But they've instituted
Reed Hastings. Not Hastings. Reed.
It is something Reed.
Reed Hoffman.
Or Reed something.
Reed Hoffman. Thank you.
Reed Hoffman. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was on Oprah for recently talking about their approach to wellness in the workplace and meditation. They have a chief mindfulness officer at LinkedIn, and I believe that these kind of strategies and techniques are going to find their way into the corporate space as a staple very, very soon. Because you just can't continue to stress people out in the name of making a living. The results are long term are not great.
I guess it's like the holy war between utilization and productivity, and coming to a company near you.
Yeah, I mean, what I have done for my own mental health is, and I work hard, but I'll say to myself, all right, that's it. I got nothing else to give today. Yep. I reached the point of exhaustion, and whatever didn't happen today, it has to happen tomorrow. Right? I'm going to watch the game, give me a glass of wine, whatever the case may be. But I do think that giving folks a break, and I mean, I think maybe my second year at Microsoft, they gave us and all this stuff is usually in the news, out of the blue, take another 5 days, extra 5. It's not PTO, it's not holidays. You can take them all in one string, or you can break them up and take the day here, day there. And I did it. A lot of people didn't want to take the days because they feel that productivity, that push to be productive. And I came on one of our meetings and I said, please take those days, right? Yeah. It's not a trick. Yeah. They want you to take those days. They don't want you to stack up vacation time because I believe they know the research, and the research is that works in their favor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also little breaks. More frequent little breaks is also easier to adapt and smooth out the productivity, the utilization curve, right, over time, versus Kai's going to be out for 6 weeks because he stacked up all his vacation time, and now he's going to, he'll be out the whole summer. He'll be out, the entire Christmas season or whatever, and they can't use you at all, right? So I think
because you had a heart attack or you got stressed out and came into the office and did something crazy, right?
That too, yeah. That too.
So ultimately, we were joking about those Zen walks, but they worked. You know what I mean?
Sure.
We would start off all upset, talking about some issue or some problem or something, and by the time we got to the 7-Eleven or where we was going, we were having a good time. Right?
It makes a difference. It really does.
It's going to be interesting to see that because when you get those breaks, there's all kind of data out there on that you're replaying things in your head when you have those breaks, and so you're actually learning them at a deeper level. And I don't know about you guys, but how many times have you solved a problem when you're in the shower or playing a game of tennis or whatever? You're working on that back in the RAM and working, and then boom, you figure it out. You're like, that's it.
There's no question. I discovered that early in my career, and it's one of the reasons why I used to hate to get interrupted, right? Because I was in a certain zone, and Curtis could tell you walk over. Sometimes I'd be like, 1 second. I'm still typing, right? But let me tell you this about that, Scott. It's not an issue now because people have discovered that when you work in tech, especially when you're a developer, that you're doing knowledge work, right? That your job
it's creative. It's creative. You're creating things.
I used to get in trouble all the time, and Curtis can attest to this because I'm also a social guy. So I'm walking over to his desk. I'm walking over to the users. I used to get called in the office. Why is Kai always outside under the tree? When I was working in the Caribbean, we had a balcony around our building, and I would go out there and do my Zen walk, right? But it's just you weren't there. I'm just by myself, and I'm walking around and I'm thinking about something. And a receptionist or somebody told my manager, how does that guy get anything done? He's every time I look up, he's out here pacing. And he told her, he's thinking. That's what he's doing, right?
Nice.
You think that if I'm at my desk, I'm working, and if I'm away, I'm not working. When really, I could be at my desk thinking about the movie that I watched last night, and I could be under a tree writing an algorithm.
Yeah.
And frankly, the cubicle is not as it's not as inspiring as a view on a veranda.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Sure.
Not to mention all the, I was ahead of the curve on this one too. I never liked the whole, and I think Google started this, open workspace, the whole, that thing, right? And when I go to train these companies before the pandemic, I would go to their campuses, and that's all you saw, people on the phones in the middle of it. I'm like, how do y'all work like this?
Mm-hmm.
And now I think it's come out now, research and other stuff saying this is not a good idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go back to a cube, but that open workspace where everybody's having their meetings, and especially for the developers, I'm like, I cannot hear myself think. Matter of fact, when I'm teaching classes in my office, and I have my window open, when the yard dude comes, I just pause. Like they can't hear it, but the guy's driving me crazy with the leaf blower.
Hey, Kai, I had a question I've been dying to ask.
Adam Sandler did a song about that, by the way.
Leaf blower.
And Mr. Leaf Blower Man.
I'm sorry, what was that, Scott?
Yeah. I know that you're a cloud expert and you're seeing that, and that's one of the areas that I'm in where I work. And I'm really curious, where are you seeing cloud go next? I mean, just as someone who's always, training the latest in cloud, where do you see it going?
Who knows? At first of all, I've learned that I don't know. I can't get a handle on that, right? Just like I learned, I can't learn it. I can't know all there is to know about the cloud.
Of course.
Because, and I say this to my people that come to my classes, as a tech person, as a developer, you always have to keep up, right? With your programming language, with your operating system, whatever. Then you get to the cloud, same thing, but now this is the most accelerated environment you've ever been in. In some cases, you're having to know multiple clouds. They're adding to the services. They're modifying the service. I mean, it's a constantly evolving thing. So when I first got into it, it was all about, you're moving workloads from premises onto the cloud, right? Then it was, now we're hybrid, right? You keep some of your architecture or some of your components on premises, you put some of them on the cloud. Now we got this thing where you install a box. This box sits in your data center, and it's the cloud in a box. Right? It's like totally opposite where we started.
So it's back to the AS400.
Exactly. I started on the mainframe, by the way. Yeah. But where I see it going, I guess what I would say about that is I see infrastructure as a service and platform as a service dwindling, and us getting more into the services being serverless and what's the word I'm looking for here? Serverless and more specific. So as the cloud evolves, right, customers, they'll come in the classroom and they'll say, when do I use this versus this? Because the feature set is not clearly defined, especially for older services, right? Should I use Azure SQL Server platform, or should I create a VM and install SQL Server? The infrastructure stuff, I think we've moved past that. I know that when I was teaching early on, a lot of companies told me when they're looking for a solution, they look PaaS first, platform as a service. So if AWS has it, they're going to go with AWS. If Google has it, or whoever has the platform, right? If all three has it, then they'll compare them. So there's a lot of that going on at the moment. But I think that the software as a service, the service, for example, when I say service, I mean like a database, and you don't do like Cosmos or DynamoDB or Mongo running in the cloud. You just provision the database and then you start working. And I just said this to some people in my class. It's like the cloud. I think the cloud is becoming like a framework or a library where when you go to build your solution, it's just what Lego blocks do I need? Now, we used to do that on one machine, right? I need this class, I need this class, I need this class. But now it's this service, this service, this service. You wrap that around whatever you want to wrap it with, which they're now calling a microservice, right? But everything runs in the cloud. It's like the cloud is the operating system. And your developers are just going to have to learn the 5, 6, 7 classes, not even that many, for the service that they're using. That's the way I see it. And I see DevOps being a huge part of that, and DevSecOps and security being, you're in security, you know that. I was just telling some folks who came into my dev class, I said, as developers, if you're not learning about security, you need to go and inject that into your curriculum, right? The days of us, and Curtis can attest, some of the early days where I write a program and then we go back and say, oh, it works. Let's make it user-friendly, right? After the fact.
Yeah.
Right. And then when I left that company that he and I worked at, we had a person, her whole thing was UI. Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I want to put a button here. No, there'll be no button there. I want to make it fuchsia. No, fuchsia is not the color we need, right? It was a whole science.
Yeah.
But when I started, I was just doing whatever I wanted. And we shoehorned in the user friendliness or to make it easier to use. And we did the same thing with security. Developers did the same thing with security, right? Security came out, we code it. Now let's go back and make it secure. I think developers, because as you're using these services that are in the cloud, you're not really hands-on. And so you have to know when you configure and provision these services or these resources that are from these services, you need to make sure you're doing it in a secure way. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I see going on. And I see probably we've seen all the contraction we're going to see. I don't see any new players. It's basically AWS, GCP, and I'm trying to learn GCP now, like I said earlier about layoffs, right?
Yeah.
GCP,
I'm constantly adding to my portfolio of what I know. GCP and then AWS. So I think those are the 3 main players. I know also, last point on this one, Scott, multi-cloud. Companies are going multi-cloud, not just hybrid, but multi-cloud. And when I started at AWS, ironically, my first customer was, I'm not going to name them, but I went out to teach them and had a great time. And then 3 years later, almost 4 years later, I started Microsoft, same first customer. They said, go out to this customer and teach them Azure. And I got out there and I walked in the room and the guy was like, Dr. Kai, what are you doing here? I'm like, what am I doing here? Because I'm in a whole different capacity now than what I was 3 years ago. They're multi-cloud, right? Sometimes it's for business continuity, redundancy. Yeah. Sometimes it's because of what they're building. They think that, Cosmos is better than Dynamo, or Dynamo is better than Cosmos, whatever service they're looking at. They like Azure for that particular component of their solution. And over here, they like GCP or AWS. And so there's a lot of that. And I didn't see that happening a whole lot, let's say 4 years ago.
Yeah, by the way, when you're saying GCP, that's Google Cloud, right?
Google Cloud platform.
Just want to make sure, yeah.
So it's the Google offering in that cloud space. Kai, I want to also ask about differences you saw at Amazon versus Microsoft in terms of the way both companies run their business, not just on the training side, but just in the business in general. I mean, I think both companies have been fantastic success stories, right? But they went through some bumps. But nowadays, many Fortune 500 companies look to Amazon, look to Microsoft, look to Apple, look to Google as the companies that have the secret sauce in terms of the operating model, particularly when it comes to technology and implementing technology, doing product development, which for those of our listeners who are not in the tech space, we talk about product development in the software world, and it's basically developing new programs, but they could be totally in-house products, totally in-house programs that are used to, maybe a tax engine for calculating VAT in Europe is a product, even though it's not sold to the public. So I'm curious, Kai, how did you see that how did you see the management of programs and the management of products differ in Amazon versus Microsoft?
I honestly didn't see a lot of difference. There's not a lot of Microsoft has this and Amazon doesn't, or Amazon doesn't have this and Microsoft does. They're very close in terms of what they offer. Although when you're at AWS, they'll say things like, well, Microsoft counts this as a cloud offering, but it's really not. But it is, right? Because something like Teams, for example, they'll say that's not cloud, but it is cloud, right? Yeah. It's just that Microsoft is really a software company, right? And Amazon has a bunch of other stuff going on. So I would say that's one of the things I saw that was very different, is that Amazon tries to use their cloud offerings and their technology in some of the other things that they're doing, in terms of offering products like, say, the Echo, for example, right? That's taking advantage of some of their cloud offerings. But Microsoft absolutely is doing that, right? The cloud has become job one, right? Mm-hmm. That was not the case, say, 6 years ago, 5 years ago. I think a lot of that happened when Satya took over, the CEO. He made the cloud be the main focus, right? That's really what we're doing at Microsoft. We're not splintered in our efforts. Everything that we're doing, we're building software, right? And that software is going to have its roots in Azure. And if it doesn't, it's headed towards Azure, right? Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I said at the outset, my title was Azure Technical Trainer, and now it's Microsoft Technical Trainer, because I now train on whatever software Microsoft offers, and we're billing that, and we're marketing that as cloud software. All the 365 Dynamics, all that stuff is running on Azure.
So just to wrap that point up, though, is how are both companies then, if you see them being very similar in a lot of ways, how are they both different than some other companies you've seen in your past experience in terms of
differentiators, right, Curtis? What differentiates them from the rest of the crowd?
So what are they doing? What do I see they're doing different capacity?
Yeah, particularly in terms of managing product development and managing teams sort of in general, managing their technology teams in general.
Well, this may sound basic, but it goes back to what I said about being customer obsessed. That's the term Amazon uses. They use customer obsessed. Microsoft just says that we focus on the customer. You'd be surprised, you probably wouldn't, but in general, how many companies don't do that? Or they'll tell you right in the face of a customer asking for something that they're not going to do that. Right. Yeah. And some of this comes from, you've heard some folks say things like the customer doesn't know what they want, really. Right. Mm-hmm. And so we're taking that into consideration. But I would say that's probably the two things that I've seen at these companies that I haven't seen in other companies. One, they don't just talk about listening to the customer, they actually do it. I mean, I marveled at it. That's number one. Number two, their culture. Right. Microsoft's culture is like none other that I've ever seen, in terms of how they take care of their employees, how they treat the employees, how they pay attention to it. I've never seen anything like it, including at Amazon. Although Amazon does it too, but it's not to the level of what I'm experiencing over here. And then they're listening to the customers, right? The culture, listen to the customers and actually responding to it, right? I can tell you, and I'll give you an example of it with Amazon. I used to teach about a service called DynamoDB, which is a database. And there was a feature, there was a need in it to control throughput. So you set the dials, right? This is how much throughput I'm expecting, IO for this database. But if you didn't give it enough, it would start to throttle it, and then it would start throwing exceptions. It was your responsibility to manage that.
Right.
People come in the classroom, why isn't this auto scaled? Why can't I just put this on automatic? And complain. And then one day I went to the dashboard, I went to the portal, and there was the auto scale, right? And in terms of our classes, right, it's not a product, but it is a product. People were coming to classes when I was at Amazon, and all of our labs for development were in Java, right? So if you didn't know Java, you just were kind of playing around. They're like, why don't you have any in C#? Why don't you have any in Python? Sure enough, 6 months later, Amazon has the same class I'm teaching, but I had to now teach it in Python, C#, and Java, right? And of course, every place I worked prior to that, I could tell whoever what my customer need was for however long I wanted to, and that never changed.
Right.
They would say they welcome the feedback. Let us know. You see the little placards on the wall. The customer's number one, all that stuff. But actually doing it, actually living up to what they're saying, no. And I would say, I don't know how many places I worked over the 30 years, but there's been a couple other places that have done that too. But that is definitely what separates them. And then I would say another thing they do with their product development, in terms of the actual products, they work to make things easy for you. They work to reduce friction, right? Mm-hmm. And you can see that in Amazon beyond the cloud, right? Whatever's making this hard, what is the obstacle to you buying this?
Yes.
Let's remove that. I give you a quick example. They did that with me. One of them was this thing, which I thought was brilliant. This thing of when a package comes to your house, they made the packaging easy to open. You remember that?
Yeah.
Used to be you cut your thumbs up trying to get into a battery case, right? Then they came up with this thing. You pull a thread or whatever, and the whole thing just comes to be. That to me is the kind of innovative. It's reducing the friction. I used to talk to folks when I was working there, and I would talk about the Kindle versus the iPad. I think you and I had this conversation too. Mm-hmm. And they would be like, well, the iPad is far superior to the Kindle. And I would go, the Kindle is an ordering device.
Yes. Yep.
Just like the Echo.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, and Microsoft does that with the cloud for the most part with the software, right? Yeah. And you can see that. You can see that in we just recently revamped our online learning. Our online learning is called Microsoft Learn. It's at learn.microsoft.com. And we had these different places to go learn all over the place. They just rolled them up into one place, reorganized it, made it real easy to use, one-stop shopping for everything Microsoft certification. And I'm sure that came from even internal. We're like, where do I go to find stuff? There's too many places, right?
Yeah.
And so they listen to the customers and they respond to the customers. I would think that's probably the biggest two things. I can remember in our days together working on something or being told that a user needed something, and we just decided they weren't going to get it, or they weren't going to get it for a particular time frame, even though they were clamoring for it. So that's probably where I would settle on, just to focus on the customer. There are other companies that do that stuff too. Like I think Salesforce does it. Obviously, Apple does it. But it's funny because when I got to Amazon and Microsoft, I found myself noticing how they operate and going, well, yeah, I mean, it seems brilliant, but it's basic. It's basic stuff. Like why isn't everyone doing it this way? I really saw that at Amazon, right? Just this obsession with the customers and making things better for the customer and comfortable for the customer. And I see it a lot in Microsoft too. But the culture at Microsoft is another big thing. It's this feeling of you're working for a company that sees you as a person and not just a human resource. And so they give you a respect basically for the work that you're doing. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, makes a big difference. Good stuff. Good stuff. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with our guest, Dr. Kai Dupe.
The Infernal Guard, Book 3, Severance. The three pieces of an age-old prophecy have been found, the children who will save the world, until one goes missing. Now it's up to the Guard to find that kidnapped piece of the puzzle, to sever the links between worlds and stop an invasion from the underworld. Will they make it in time? Will this former enemy cooperate, or does her hatred live on? Coming soon wherever audiobooks are sold. Witness the end of the thrilling Infernal Guard trilogy by S.G.D. Singh.
And we're back on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis, and our guest today, my good friend, Dr. Kai Dupe. Kai is regaling us with stories of his travels through the Amazon and Azure clouds, and what he's learned from both places and how that compares to his past experience. And during the break, Kai was sharing some leadership stories, I think. Scott, did you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of sum up what Kai had said, because I think the lessons that he's providing to listeners are they're pretty incredible. And it's just three things. So first, that true customer focus, that customer obsession, trying to meet customer needs, but truly doing it, not just giving it lip service. Fantastic. Number two is an employee focus and the value. And you could just hear Kai talk about how important it was to him. And I think all of their employees, it's important that your company is really there for you and provides for you. And then last, just that constant pursuit of removing friction. I think that is just a key principle. So those three things, I think any company that listens to those, and even like in our discussion with Dimitar a couple of weeks ago, same thing, that focus on their employees and removing that friction. I mean, just so important to companies. And a lot of them don't get it.
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of that. You talked, Kai, about the great culture that you experience at Microsoft and also a very good culture at Amazon. What strikes me is that I'm hearing a lot of stories these days. I mean, I think this has been happening for quite a while. In my experience, I've known more than a few folks doing this sort of thing, but you hear a lot of stories these days about young tech workers working 2 full-time paid jobs, which, frankly, in terms of the employment contracts that they sign, it probably is in violation, right? So it's probably technically illegal based on the contracts they sign. But if God bless them if they can get away with it. But the question is, what makes them want to do that? Is really just money, or is it satisfaction with the culture? You talked earlier about the focus on wellness and sustainable pace is something you enjoy about Microsoft. You work hard, but it's sustainable versus not being cut from that cloth. You said when you're young, maybe you had that side hustle drive. I know I did. I grew up starting in entrepreneurship at 13, right? I think a lot of folks entering this industry have that sort of drive, but maybe don't have the risk tolerance to actually go out and start something on their own. So think, well, I can have the best of both worlds. I can have the extra money with my drive, but not incur any of the risk by just taking 2 jobs. Have you experienced any of that?
You mean from folks that I'm acquainted with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I tell them it's crazy. For me, a side hustle, that's different than 2 full-time gigs. I still side hustle, right?
Yeah,
that's just
for sure.
You and I. We're just, that's how we're gonna be, right? Because I got to have multiple streams of income, not because of the total, but because of the stream, right?
Right.
People getting laid off right now, they're not freaking out if they have other money coming in from another source. So that's my motivating factor there. But yeah, I have a nephew working 2 jobs, and he can do it because of the time zone difference. You have one that starts at 6 and one that starts at like 9 or something. And I don't know how he works that out. I think that remote has also enabled that quite a bit, right? Because you don't have to physically be, in a place at the same time, right? Especially if you're doing development work, that's real easy to do, right?
Yeah.
But it's absolutely not for me. I do think that, especially for the young folks, the motivating factor is money. There's no question about it. And they probably figure they can do it until they can't do it anymore, but they'll stack the money, right? Yeah. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. I'll code in 2 different places. I'll code during the day and I'll code at night. I'll code. And also, Curtis, I think a huge part of it is the opportunities. There's so many.
Yeah.
I say this to folks all the time. I'm like, even if you don't want to be in tech as your passion or your career, do it to get yourself out of your current situation, right? These kids that I'm teaching in Mississippi, same thing. I'm not saying you have to go be a career programmer, but if you want to improve your economic situation, you can learn. I would tell them right here, I'm showing you how to debug a Python program. This is a skill right now you can go and use in the workplace. So I think the opportunities is so. I mean, 10 times a week somebody's approaching me about something, and I just have to tell them I would love to do it. I'm just not available. I don't have the cycles to do it. But I do think that money is a motivating factor. A lot of the companies too, they may be in violation of their agreements, but a lot of the companies are aware of it, right? They're like, you can tell them I work a full-time job, and they'll say, okay, but can you give us this many hours a week, right?
Yeah.
And it may be 20, 30 hours or close to 40 hours if you include the weekend, and they're getting, and also I say this about it too. All the positions are not equally yoked. And what I mean by that is your first job may be the one you're really working on, and the second one, you're like a coach.
Yeah.
Right? You're not really stressed on the second one. And that's how my nephew is. He's not really stressed on it. He's like babysitting on the second one,
Yeah.
So that's easy money. I don't know. I don't think it's sustainable. As a matter of fact, I don't think my nephew is still doing it. He did it for like a year, 6 months to a year. That's very, very difficult to do, and to keep up with everything. I think it's just too much. And me personally, at this point in my career, I'm looking for a little more freedom.
Yeah.
In terms of, like I said, I'm tethered to the microphone. I'm tethered to the camera. I love it. Just like you know. This is what we do. But it's not as much fun for me as it was in front of people. I'm not a big fan of the virtual training stuff.
Yeah.
When I heard it being introduced, they tried to slip it in, but I picked up on it. I was like, and we're never going back. I don't believe, maybe, here and there, a customer may request you kind of thing, but I don't think we're ever going back to. I mean, hey man, I don't know if I told you this, but when I first came out here to work for Amazon, it was a party.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going somewhere every week: Chicago, Dallas, LA, New York, Dublin, Paris, right? Every week it was somewhere, and I'm just having a good time. I walk in the room like a rock star, talk about, AWS, same thing in Microsoft the first year. I show up, I'm traveling, having a good time. Right. Thank you, good night. Exactly. And now I'm in like my spare bedroom looking at my neighbor's, roof. It's not nearly as much fun. Now I have contemplated.
And by the way, for those customers who are in need of training, when you hire Kai, you get all the training you need, but you also get about 50% stand-up comedy. You get some great stories.
Let's not get into that.
But man, Kai's trainings are great to watch.
I was having the time of my life, and then when the pandemic came, that really shut it down.
Yeah.
But I have contemplated, because I want a little more freedom, maybe going back into programming, right? And it's a good time because of what I told you earlier, Scott, about how I see the cloud going. When folks come into the classroom, they don't understand when I say cloud and then I say programming, they don't understand how the twain shall meet, right? And I'm like, look, just think of the cloud as your OS or your web browser or your mobile device or whatever it is. You're going to get a class and interact with that resource. That's it. I'm not teaching you how to program. And once they hear that, they're like, oh. But so I'm considering, because it's one of the reasons why I got out of programming was I was bored. Yeah. Right? I'm like, we were doing the same stuff over and over and over. But now
this would be a new kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh man, you got everything you can, and I'm on the backside. So when I get these opportunities, right? Because I'm thinking about going back into coding. I had a guy call me up. He's like, hey, I have a project but I need help. And he's like, I said, what do you need? He's like, well, this person wants to develop this application. I told I can do it in .NET, but I need some Azure resources. I don't know Azure. I said, okay, I'll do all the back end Azure stuff, but I'm not writing any code, right? Because I don't have to on the back end. And he said, okay. And he wrote all the front end stuff. We hooked it up to what I put on the back end, got our check and moved on. So I could do a lot of that stuff that won't take a lot of my time. I'm considering doing that. But it's so many a new programming language comes out every Thursday now, right? Yeah. But when I was coming up, that wasn't the case. And so I'm looking at and Nacho was talking about some languages a while back. I'm looking at a few new languages. I may stick with C#, I don't know. But I'm starting to get my programming chops going a little bit because just for some variety.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and just for the audience, Nacho that Kai referenced is a mutual acquaintance of all three of ours, and my business partner in a software project that we're developing. So Kai, you talked about the future of tech. You talk about reasons why people should consider a career in tech. What advice are you giving your kids? Are you encouraging them to go into tech?
That's a cold question. I'm ashamed to say this. My kids have zero interest in tech. And I didn't push them into tech.
Yeah.
I know maybe I had an opposite effect because they see me working in tech. They don't want to do it. I don't know. My son showed an interest a little while in Python because they introduced it at school. But they're more artsy craftsy. So I don't have any hope that they'll go into tech, and I don't push them into tech.
Did I tell you my story with my oldest when she was like 9?
I don't think so.
I tried to get her into one of these before Swift came out, before Apple released Swift. There was a Java-based
Scratch.
Yeah, it might have been Scratch, actually. Might have been Scratch. And so I was helping her through that, and she got to where she coded a little game, and then she kind of, okay, cool, and you put it away, and then Swift came out and said, hey, it's on your iPad, it'll be really fun. And she went, yeah, okay. And I said, sweetie, you're not interested in this? I mean, you can code up a video game. And she said, I'd rather just play the video game. Fair enough.
Exactly. And now my son, he plays video games, but my daughter, she just could care less. I mean, she could care less about tech. But in terms of other young people, right? Like they do have friends that are interested in tech. A lot of people around here are, because we live in this little bubble in Redmond. And on every street corner, there's a sign about getting involved in tech. My neighbor's son just graduated from University of Washington, computer science. He's attending University of Wisconsin-Madison, and his dad works at Microsoft. My other neighbor works at Microsoft. They got these jobs lined up for them as soon as they graduate. But like I tell these kids that are in Mississippi, it's a great field. And it's a great field whether you're going to go into IT or not. Yeah. Right. And this is what I have been using my whole life. I didn't know when I learned how to program, it was going to lead me to doing all the speaking stuff that I do. I had no idea that was going to happen. Training, had no idea that was going to happen. I've written a book chapters. Didn't get the credit for it, but I did write it. And stuff is still coming, right? Just like I said, when I went to apply when I went over to the school when I was working in San Francisco, and as soon as they heard that I was a programmer, they wanted to offer me the job because of that skill, right? It's a very lucrative, in high demand skill that I can ride for the rest of my life, and I can even do it when I'm so-called retired. Like I'm sure, Nacho, wherever he is, whenever he feels like it, he can dust off a laptop and code up something, right? Yeah. And that's why I think, when I was in high school, someone said, if you get a degree in computer science, you'll never have trouble finding a job. And that's been the case. I have never had a hard time finding or keeping a job, and I've always made good money, sometimes more than others. One of the lessons I try to give the young people is, this stuff is not as complicated as folks make it out to be. They make you think you got to be some sort of genius before you can pursue a career in technology, and it's simply not the case. I took a bunch of math in high school, a bunch of math in college, and probably if I got a job at NASA, I would use that math one day. But I've never used it up to this point. trigonometry and differential equations, all this stuff. I've never used it. Not
Yeah.
writing business applications.
Yeah.
So that intimidates people. And you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned it earlier, this idea now, a lot of colleges are no longer requiring SATs, no longer requiring ACTs, because they finally figured out that it doesn't measure anything really. Same thing with a lot of companies have announced, there's an article I posted on LinkedIn a while back, they no longer require you to have a degree. I think Google might be one of them.
Yeah.
No longer requiring you to have a degree, but can you do the work? Yeah, I can do the work.
Yeah.
So there you have it. And these opportunities are worldwide. I mean, I tell these kids in Mississippi, when you go to apply for a job now, it's not just you against the dude or the girl in Mississippi. It's the world. You're competing with the world. These jobs are open to the world. So if you, and my number one point to them is, I would not tell anyone just to go into tech because you can make a lot of money, because you can, and all that. But you're not going to last if you don't have some sort of love at some level, some sort of passion about what you're doing. For me, it wasn't necessarily programming, but I've always liked problem solving. I've always liked that, right?
So this is my last question for you, Kai. With that in mind, what you've expounded upon from your earliest days, the lessons you learned, the idea that you found a horse you could ride to prosperity, coupled with the self-knowledge you've gained while doing that, and the last points that you dropped about, your kids not necessarily being interested in tech and you're not pushing them to it. If you could sort of summarize the totality of this conversation, the totality of your experience, what nugget of wisdom would you give young people? Would you say, is that nugget of wisdom, hey, even if you hate tech, learn it so that you can always have a horse to ride? Or would it be something else based on what you told us today?
Well, I used to say that I would tell young people to make sure that they're digitally literate. But we're making sure that's the case, right? It's hard for you to come out of high school these days and not be digitally literate. What I would probably say is, in some places or in most places, computer science is not a required course, I don't think. It's not a class you have to take. My advice would be learn something about computers. Learn the basics of computers. Learn the fundamentals of computer science. Take a class, take an elective. And then whatever you're going to do going forward, that's going to benefit you. You have got to have some understanding of computational thinking, some understanding of problem solving, some understanding of logic, some understanding of how these machines are working that are all around you for you to extract the most meaning that you can from society. The minute that you don't understand how something works, I watch people at parking garages struggle, right? Or even make a payment because they don't know what's going on. You have to have some idea about this technology that pervades our society, and having a basic understanding about, CPUs, RAM, algorithms. Like I was talking to somebody the other day and they said, the algorithm this, the algorithm that. I'm like, they're all algorithms, right? Like that's like a new buzzword now, right? Yeah. Algorithm. So that, to where here's how I'll say it. When I was in my 20s, if I went to a party and someone said, Kai, what do you do for a living? And I said I was a computer programmer, they would say, oh, what does that mean? You're good at Word? And I'm like, no. What's Word? What's Microsoft Word? I don't know what that is. It was a data processing application. Now everybody knows what a programmer is, or a developer is, or software engineer is, right? Everybody knows what those are, but they don't know what they do. They still don't know. Not everybody understands what's going on, right? So I would say to young people, get yourself some understanding, not so much about tech, but computer science. How do these computers work so that you can take that and apply it to being a lawyer, being an accountant, being a doctor. I have a friend who's a surgeon. He's completely computer illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had other people who worked at some of these larger corporations who have had opportunities to advance in the corporation, but their fear of technology, which they share with me, held them back. They're like, I'm afraid I can't learn it. And when I moved out here to Seattle, one of my friends had a party for me in San Antonio, and he got me to the side of the party and said, "Hey man, what if you go out there and you can't do it?" I said, "Do what?" "Do the job that they have for you. What if you can't do it?" "What do you mean?" I'm going to do it, and if I can't do it, I'll come back, right? But that's his fear of tech, right? His fear of, he knows my job is technical. He knows he hears Amazon, that puts an extra thing on it, right? You out there with the big boys, it's top-notch company, think you can do it. Yeah, I can do it. And if you have that knowledge, I was just having this conversation earlier. Confidence, right? Back when you and I used to speak at South by Southwest EDU, it's not to introduce young people to tech early. That's not, you don't introduce them to tech early to make them good at tech. You introduce them to it earlier to build their confidence. Mm-hmm. You expose it to them to see if they're interested in it. But once you show them, which was in my case, that I can do algebra or that I can write a program, my confidence builds, right? Once I establish the confidence, that's it. It's over, right? I'm never going anywhere thinking that I can't do something. And so if you have these kids take a computer science class with good teachers and good instruction, folks that know how to teach it so they can understand it, it opens up a whole world to them, whether they go into tech or not.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. It's great advice. Hey, Kai, we really appreciate you joining us on this Saturday. It's been great to catch up with you, my friend.
Likewise, man. I enjoyed it. Nice meeting you as well, Scott. Much
nice
continued success with the podcast. Looking forward to seeing greater things from you folks. It's been a pleasure.
Sounds good. Well, go ahead, Curtis. You got something to say?
I was going to say, I'm looking forward, Kai, if you got a few minutes to stick around after we wrap, that would be great. But I know you're on a short leash, so don't worry if you can't.
Sure.
Okay. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us today on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. We'd like to thank our producer, Brad Thomas. Brad, thanks for everything you do for us.
Hey, and Brad.
Yay. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, click on that like button. And if you want to hear more, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified, on the bell. If you're not watching us on YouTube, we're also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and of course, direct on the Outspoken.show website. So until next week, thank you, everybody.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.